I read my father's will in silence, then the truth about his love broke me. There are moments in life that aren't just remembered. They are carved into the very bedrock of who we are. They become landmarks, dividing lines between the person we were before and the person we are forced to become after. For me, that moment began with the ring of a telephone. It was early. The morning light was just a pale gray suggestion behind the curtains. The sound was like an alarm in the stillness of my apartment, jarring and out of place. I remember the cold feeling of the floor beneath my feet, the way my heart seemed to beat in my throat as I picked up the receiver. The voice on the other end was calm, too calm. It was a voice trained for delivering news that shatters worlds, and it did so with a terrifying professional gentleness. "He's gone," they said, just like that. 2 words. He's gone. And the man who had been a constant, towering figure in the landscape of my life, the man whose silence I had both feared and resented, was simply erased from the world. In the days that followed, the world felt muffled, like I was living inside a snow globe. I went through the motions, the arrangements, the condolences, the somber nods. People would share their stories. "He was a good man," they'd say, "so strong, so determined." And I would nod, because what could I say? That I had never truly known him? That the man they described was a stranger to me? You see, I grew up thinking I understood my father, but I didn't. I thought I knew what his love looked like, or rather, what it didn't look like. He was stern, a man carved from granite and routine. His world was one of order, of discipline, of unspoken expectations. I can still picture him in his armchair every evening, reading the paper, a fortress of quiet. As a boy, I remember one time I was in the kitchen, my small hands fumbling with a glass of milk. It slipped, shattering on the floor, a white river spreading across the tiles. I looked up, my eyes wide with fear and shame, waiting for the explosion. But it never came. He just looked at me, shook his head with a slight, almost imperceptible frown, and walked away. He returned with a towel, cleaned the mess in silence, and left the room without a single word. In that moment, and in 1,000 moments like it, I constructed my truth. He didn't care. His love was an empty room, a language I could not speak. I mistook his silence for indifference, his discipline for coldness. I built a fortress of my own, one made of resentment, but now I see the blindness of my youth. His love was always there. It was just a quiet, subterranean river, flowing deep beneath the surface of our lives. It was in the small, practical things, the way he always ensured I had the best books, not because I asked, but because he noticed I'd finished the last one. The way he quietly, without fanfare, paid for years of piano lessons, even when money was tight, simply because he saw my fingers tap out rhythms on the table. It was in the late nights he spent at the office, a sacrifice I attributed to ambition, but which I now understand was for my future, for my schooling, for a security he never had. His love was a currency of action, not of words. It was measured in sacrifices made quietly and without complaint. It was a love that believed providing was the same as embracing. The day of the reading of the will arrived. I walked into the lawyer's office feeling numb, armored. The room smelled of old wood and leather, a scent of solemnity and finality. I was prepared for the transaction of death. I was prepared for money, for properties, for bank accounts. I was braced for a final material confirmation of our relationship, a cold exchange of assets. I expected to feel a rush of greed, or perhaps a wave of disappointment, but I felt nothing, just a hollow emptiness. The lawyer, a man with kind eyes and a weary demeanor, read through the standard clauses, a bequest to a charity, the house, the investments. It was all so expected, so sterile. I felt a strange sense of closure, the closing of a book I had never enjoyed reading. And then he paused. He adjusted his glasses and looked directly at me. "And to my son," he said, his voice softening, "I leave these words, not as instructions, but as truths I could not say while alive." The air left the room. Truths I could not say while alive. My father's words, a phrase I never thought I'd hear. It was a key turning in a lock I thought was sealed forever. The lawyer handed me a simple, cream-colored envelope. It was thick, substantial. My name was written on the front in my father's precise, unwavering script, a handwriting I knew from birthday cards that only ever contained his signature. My own hands, which had felt so steady moments before, began to tremble. The paper felt expensive, weighty, embossed with his initials. I had never seen him cry. I had never heard him speak from the vulnerable, tender places of his heart. And here it was, held in my shaking hands, a lifetime of silence condensed into a few pages. I broke the seal. I unfolded the letter, and I read the first line. My dearest son, if you are reading this, then I have failed in the most important task of my life. I failed to tell you. I had to stop. I had to put the letter down and breathe. The voice in my head was Asterisk, his asterisk voice. Not the stern, distant voice of my memory, but a different one. Softer, older, full of a regret so profound it was almost a physical presence in the room. The man I had loved and hated all at once was speaking to me now, directly from beyond the grave. He wrote about his mistakes. He listed them with a painful clarity. The times he had been too harsh when a little kindness was what I needed. The times he had demanded excellence when what I truly needed was his approval. He admitted he had been blind, so blind to the fact that a child needs affection as much as he needs discipline. He confessed his fear. This was the revelation that began to crack the foundation of my world. He was afraid. My father, my rock, my unmovable mountain, was terrified. He was afraid that the world, in all its cruelty and hardship, would break me. He believed, with every fiber of his being, that if he didn't teach me toughness, if he didn't build a fortress around my heart, if he didn't prepare me for the battles he knew I would face, then I would not survive. His silence, his coldness, his discipline, it was all a desperate, flawed armor he was trying to forge for me. Tears began to well in my eyes, hot and unfamiliar. I had carried this resentment for decades. I had built my identity on the story of the neglected son. I had blamed him for my loneliness, for my deep-seated sense of never being quite enough, for every harsh word and every cold glance that had stung like winter. But here it was, written in his own hand, a lifetime of love, buried under a mountain of fear, pride, and a tragic, heartbreaking silence. He told me stories I never knew. Nights he had stood in the doorway of my room, watching me sleep, worrying if I had the courage for the next day. Moments of quiet pride when I graduated, when I got my first job, that he locked away in his heart, believing that to voice them would make me soft. Times he had seen me struggle and had physically ached to reach out, to pull me into an embrace. But he stopped himself, convinced that such softness would be his ultimate failure as a father. And then I read the line, the one that shattered the last of my defenses, the one that broke me completely. In my final days, he wrote, as I look back on the landscape of my life, I realized that I never truly measured my love by what I said, but by what I left behind. And I leave you this, not money, not land, not possessions, but the knowledge that every choice I made, every hard lesson, every moment I held my tongue when I wanted to speak, was made with love. More love than I ever knew how to express, more than words could ever convey, more than you may have ever believed. I read that line over and over and over again. My chest ached with a pain that was both agonizing and liberating. It was as if every memory, every disappointment, every argument, every moment I had spent convinced of his indifference was being rewired. They weren't acts of cruelty. They weren't neglect. They were the only language of love he knew how to speak, a language of fearful, desperate protection. And I had been illiterate. He went on to confess his regrets with a rawness that was devastating. He wished he had hugged me more. He wished he had told me he was proud of me, not just assumed I knew. He wished he had laughed with me more freely, shared his own fears and failures. He admitted that he was sometimes afraid of being too soft, too vulnerable, too human. He saw vulnerability as a crack in the armor, a weakness the world could exploit, in him and in me. And then the closing words of his letter, which I will carry with me until my last breath. My son, if you read this and feel anger, know that it is mine too, for having failed you. If you feel pain, know that it is shared, for I have carried it with me every day. But if you feel love, I hope you feel mine, always, even when I am gone. I could not move. I could not speak. I sat in that leather chair, in that quiet wood-paneled office, completely enveloped in a silence that was no longer empty, but was now filled with his presence. The weight of his love, a love I had misunderstood my entire life, finally settled on me. It was not a light weight. It was heavy, profound, and real When I finally left the office, the city felt different. The noise of the traffic wasn't just noise, it was the sound of life. The sunlight seemed to touch the buildings with a golden, almost sacred light. The air felt lighter, easier to breathe. I carried the letter in my jacket pocket, right over my heart. It wasn't a treasure of gold or property. It was a treasure of revelation. It was proof that love can exist in the quietest of ways, unseen, unspoken, and yet be powerful enough to shape an entire life. At home, I sat by the window for a long, long time. I thought of all the years lost to misunderstanding. I replayed the arguments that had seemed so meaningful, the cold stares that had felt like rejection, the lessons that had stung so deeply. And I realized the most humbling truth of all. My father had not failed me. I had failed to see him. I had failed to look past the fortress walls to see the man standing guard inside, terrified for the boy he was protecting. In the days and weeks that followed, I began to remember him differently. Not as the man of discipline and distance, but as the man who had watched me grow in silence, who had worried in silence, who had loved in silence with a ferocity I could only now comprehend. I saw him in the small gestures I had overlooked my whole life, the quiet payment of a tuition bill, the careful way he planned for my future, the stern voice that I now understood disguised a trembling, fearful heart. I saw him everywhere. And suddenly, the anger that had been my constant companion for so long, it began to dissolve. In its place, a profound, aching gratitude began to grow. One evening, alone in my room, the silence felt different. It wasn't his silence anymore, it was ours, and I finally found the words. I spoke aloud, my voice cracking in the quiet room for the first time in decades. "I understand, Dad," I whispered. "I understand now, and I love you." It was as if the room itself exhaled, a long-held breath finally released. The years of misunderstanding, of resentment, of pain, they didn't just vanish, but they lost their power. They dissolved. I felt lighter, freer, as though a weight I had carried my entire life, a weight I had mistaken for a part of my own skeleton, had finally been lifted. His love had broken me. Yes, it shattered the man I thought I was. But in that breaking, it painstakingly rebuilt me into someone new, someone who could finally see. I carry his letter with me still, not as a reminder of what I lack, but as a testament to what was always there, flowing faithfully beneath the surface. Some fathers are not loud. Some fathers do not say the words we so desperately need to hear. Some love is written not in poetry or in embraces, but in deeds, in sacrifices, in the quiet, invisible choices made every single day. And now I understand. I am whole. I am free. And I will never, ever forget that some truths, once discovered, have the power not only to break us, but to transform us forever. Because the final, magnificent, heartbreaking truth about my father's love is this: it was always there. Waiting. Silent, patient, and enduring. And when I finally saw it, when I finally learned to read its quiet language, it shattered me. And from the pieces, it rebuilt me into the man I was always meant to be.